All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our second annual Darwin Day event. Thank you to everyone who was able to make it to the educational tables this morning. It was a lot of fun to have a lot of people in the room talking about their interests and learning about other people's interests. And we had a really great turnout. So if you're able to make it to that, thank you very much. If I don't already know you, I am the coordinator for introductory biology. I'm Professor Sellers. Many of you I've had in class or have in class already, which is great to see you. As I mentioned, this is our second annual Darwin Day we've been able to put on last year. Sort of implies that was the first year last year. This year, we're continuing to celebrate scientific curiosity, which is really what Darwin Day is about. So Darwin this year would be 215 years old. And so we celebrate his birthday by having this community event where it's all about you and scientific curiosity and just wanting to know more about the world. Even though Darwin did a lot of work in biology, it's for us here at UNH, it's trying to foster an environment where we want to know more about you and your interests and what drives you to be here and to learn. And so while a lot of people were talking about different aspects of science, we're also really interested in other parts of your interests. So thank you for being here today. At this point in the Darwin Day celebration, we have our keynote address with this year's guest speaker. Her name is Karinne Tenenbaum. Karinne is a junior at Yale, and I found Karinne's biography about it was over the summer and was reading through her background. And I found that Karinne is studying ecology and evolutionary biology at Yale. But what really caught my attention was that she is a founder for an organization called Taking Flight, which is an educational initiative to foster environmental ethic amongst youth. And then as I was continuing to read about Karinne, I found that she was also the winner of the Darwin 200, which is a planetary conservation project, and where it recognizes the top 200 most capable young naturalists and conservationists in the world. And that was an award this past year, right? January, yeah. And so I saw that and I was like, this is perfect. Karinne's story fits exactly into what Darwin Day is all about. And so I reached out, and Karinne was gracious enough to accept our invitation to speak. And so I'm going to let Karinne take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Lunch was delicious. I hope yours was as well. I wanted to again thank Michael Sellers for the invitation to speak at this year's second annual Darwin Day celebration. Thank you to the University of New Haven for hosting, and of course to all of you for sharing your time with me today. It's an honor to be here. I would also like to start by thanking the many organizations and many individuals that have played crucial roles in the projects I will be discussing today. They have inspired me, they have supported me, my teachers, my mentors, my professors, my peers, and most of all, my family, without whom I would not be here today. You're going to see many of these faces throughout the talk. I'd also like to dedicate today to my younger self, who once wrote a 25-page paper on Charles Darwin and the Galapagos Islands, whose fifth grade teacher did not want to read or grade at all, but somehow knew that there was something special about Darwin's discoveries and his story. So a bit about me. I was born and raised in Ann Arbor, Michigan, the wholesome Midwestern town, surrounded by the diverse research community at the University of Michigan and the rushing Huron River. And coming from a family of women scientists, I was raised to be curious, creative, and an outdoors enthusiast. And like them, I turned out equally as stubborn, prone to procrastination, and averse to decision making. And I tell you all of this because I believe your background and your upbringing actively shapes your worldview and thus influences why and how we make our life choices. And so when we think of Darwin, we often imagine him like this: an elderly man bathed in glory and genius, a prolific author, and a world-renowned naturalist. I, like you, find it quite difficult to relate to great individuals like Darwin and believe that my path could ever resemble his. And it's easy to forget that Darwin was once young, 22 years old, naive, and fueled by curiosity and searching for great adventure. It's true he was born to a wealthy family, but like many, he was an indifferent student. He dropped out of medical school to become a clergyman, and in 1831, he found himself embarking on a 5-year journey on the HMS Beagle, not to look for the wonders of nature, but to make better maps of South America. And he wasn't there as the official naturalist, but actually as the companion to Captain Robert Fitzroy, who feared the loneliness of command. And he almost didn't even get to go because Captain Fitzroy didn't like Darwin's nose. It wasn't, he claimed, the nose of someone with the sufficient energy and determination for such a voyage. And it did take Darwin almost 2 decades to publish his groundbreaking book on the origin of species. If your worldview can be influenced by your experiences, this means that your perspective is fluid. It too can evolve. And one of the most famous quotes attributed to Darwin is this: "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change." Never mind that this quote, although tied to Darwin, actually belonged to Leon Megginson, a business professor at Louisiana State University. But I find that this last part is particularly compelling because Darwin's own journey hints at this idea that perhaps the path to success, to greatness, and survival is not as linear as it appears. So I'm a student, a scientist, and an educator. Most notably, I'm a birder, an observer of the incredible diversity and fascinating behavior of birds. And it's not just a pastime, it's a lifestyle. Birding transforms road trips into hawk watches and mundane neighborhood walks into thrilling expeditions. Now I'm always searching for the extraordinary in the ordinary. My first birding experience was in 2nd grade when I participated in Science Olympiad, a nonprofit organization that hosts competitive science tournaments for students in grades K through 12. And through an event called Feathered Friends, I was introduced to the magical world of birds. But when people ask me why I started birding, I actually start the story here. It's August 2019. I had just started my freshman year of high school, wondering what the heck I was going to do with my life and thinking I probably should have known, or at least have been very close to figuring it out. And I remember my mother had a colleague at work that was super interested in birds. And one day she gave my mother this copy of the Living Bird magazine, which is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's quarterly magazine. And she handed it to me on a car ride back from school. And I don't have a spark bird, as they say in the birding community, which is, the pink-footed goose that started it all. But I do have this spark moment. And in this issue was a 2019 article published in Science called Decline of the North American Avifauna that revealed that in the last 30 years, we've lost about 1/3 of the world's birds. How many is that? That's 160 million aerial insectivores, 500 million boreal forest birds, 720 million grassland birds, and 2.5 billion migratory birds. Rachel Carson warned that one day the skies would empty. Tragically, her prediction is coming true. I found this particularly terrifying, and I resolved to do whatever I could to bring birds back. And I started by joining the local Washtenaw County Bird and Nature Alliance, attending monthly meetings and participating in annual regional May and Christmas bird counts to monitor local bird populations. And on my own walks, I reported my sightings on eBird, one of the world's largest biodiversity-related citizen science projects. And at one of these meetings, I met Professor Jamie Cornelius, who is a professor at then Eastern Michigan University, and she gave this amazing talk about crossbills. And I went up after the meeting and I asked her, would she consider letting a freshman volunteer in her lab? And lucky for me, she said yes. And so that summer, I was working on the high lead levels in American robins after the Flint water crisis. But I was one of almost none. There was almost no one under the age of 35 there at that meeting. And so I thought there should be more young birders. Why aren't there more young birders? And so I started the Ornithological Society of Pioneer, OSP. And this was Ann Arbor's first high school bird club. And I expanded it across the district. And I taught birding basics from identification to sketching. and I led weekly walks around town. And birding became contagious. As something extraordinary happens when a tenth of the student body jumps into a birding group chat and it becomes feathered chaos. And out on our walks, we would conduct birdability surveys to document and improve accessibility in city parks in the hopes of making birding outings that are exclusive to everybody in the birding community. And in March 2020, when the world shut down and I was at home waiting for the sourdough bread starter to rise, I would work on a podcast. It's a novice birding podcast called Taking Flight. There are 12 episodes that talk about birding and species groups and or interview with someone in the field in the hopes of making birding education free and accessible. But wanting bird conservation to be a better and more larger part of the climate conversation, I served on the inaugural Freeman Environmental Education Center Youth Council, which was a district-wide program and presented at local and state conferences about the importance of fostering sustainable youth leadership and viewing birding from an environmental lens. And in 2020, I was fortunate to attend the Michigan Young Birders Camp virtually. And while there with my fellow campers, we helped found the Michigan Young Birders Network, a branch of Michigan Audubon that was designed to connect young birders across the state. And I later returned to the camp as a counselor. In my junior summer, I wanted to take a deeper dive into breeding birds in the city. And so I interned with Juliet Berger, who is the city ornithologist and president of the Washington Bird and Nature Alliance. And we conducted surveys for species at risk and monitored nest boxes and engaged the community in sustainable practices. I talked with park goers about the dangers of fishing line to bald eagles, and I negotiated with officials at the Michigan Department of Transportation about how we can adjust the construction timeline to minimize impact to cliff swallow colonies. These discourses taught me the importance of learning to navigate rather than circumvent difficult conversations. Sorry. But some people in the park told me that birding was too expensive for them, and they had a point. So I thought, what if I could get binoculars into the hands of local residents and promote environmental literacy at the same time? In my senior year, I applied for and received funding from the Sustaining an Arbor Together grant program to purchase 7 binoculars and a spotting scope for use in the community to increase the number of birders. The Bins for Birders initiative, led by OSP and in collaboration with the Washington Bird and Nature Alliance, strives to increase inclusivity by lowering socioeconomic barriers to birding. So by August 2022, I was thriving in the bird field. Biology was my favorite school subject, and I was intrigued by ecology and evolutionary biology as a potential career path. But right before I got to university, I had this existential crisis that maybe I didn't know what I wanted. Maybe I stumbled into ornithology, and there was something else in ecology that was really my calling, what I was supposed to be doing. So when I got there, I sought diverse field and lab research experience to acquire new skills and to broaden my understanding of what was out there. So in my freshman year, I took a course called Collections at the Peabody Museum, which was an independent research seminar in which every student picked a research project from a list of projects to do for the semester. And there was this very tempting bird project, but I told myself that I should try something new, otherwise I would never know this answer I was searching for. And so I chose to work on microfossil fish teeth to see whether we could use morphology to help us characterize them and elucidate evolutionary relationships. And although I missed birds tremendously, I loved the research. I loved working in the collections, I loved using fancy microscopes, and 2 years later, I had just presented our work at the annual meeting of the Society of Integrative Comparative Biology in Atlanta in early January. And although I loved it, fish wasn't for me. So that summer, I tried something else. I headed up to the Yale Myers Forest in northeastern Connecticut and explored the drivers of ranavirus epidemics in wood frogs. And knowing nothing about herpetology or disease ecology, I spent 10 weeks waist deep in vernal ponds catching over 2,000 tadpoles. And once again, I loved it. I loved being in the field. I loved interacting with wildlife. And although aquatic ecology wasn't for me, I did discover a love of forestry. But after 2 non-avian organismal experiences, and although those research experiences taught me new techniques and they helped shape the way that I think about science today, I made a long awaited return back to birds in the fall. I took bird behavior and worked on scanning electron microscopy analysis of a rare Venezuelan hummingbird. And it was around this time that um, something called Darwin 200 came on my radar. So back when I was in the forest, my mother had sent me this article, this BBC article about a big ship, a Dutch tall ship to be exact. And I learned that Darwin 200 is a planetary conservation initiative that aims to change the world for the better by retracing Darwin's voyage over 2 years. And along the way, they were dropping 200 young environmentalists at these ports around the world to do a 1 week long research project with a local nonprofit. And according to Darwin 200, these are individuals who have changed the world and have the potential to revolutionize the future. And sitting on my bunk bed in the middle of the forest, I did not feel that I had changed the world. But my friends encouraged me to apply, and so I did. And I believe it was in October of my sophomore year, I got this crazy email in my inbox. And on the very last day of the fall semester, as I was packing up my dorm for winter recess, I got an even crazier email that proposed that in 3 weeks, I head to the southernmost town in the world. For context, I was 19. I had never traveled internationally by myself, never to South America, let alone the tip of the continent. And the spring semester started on January 16th, and I would have to miss the first 2 weeks of the semester of some rather rigorous courses. And I remember I ran around campus asking all my academic mentors and peers, what do you think? Should I go? And many understandably said, no, you shouldn't go. And there was a few who did say yes. And I'm so happy that they did, because if they hadn't, I likely wouldn't have gone. And I wouldn't be where I am now, who I am now, standing here today. Did I get booted out of 2 of my classes by less than understanding professors? Yes. Did I have to read hundreds of pages of shorebird policy in Spanish on the plane? Yes. Was I momentarily stranded in a small Chilean airport and had to do international customs in Spanish? See? Did I return to a mountain of homework that took me dozens of hours and admittedly a couple all-nighters to finish? Yes. Did I second guess my decision to go every step of the way? Yes. Was it worth it? Yes. In January 2024, I traveled to Puerto Williams, Chile to identify threats to shorebirds in the Cape Horn Biosphere Reserve. Once again, thank you to the amazing team, our photographers, my fellow Darwin leader, Heather Needham, and the brilliant scientists at the Cape Horn International Center. We had 3 project objectives. What has happened to shorebirds in the past and what are the current trends? What conservation work is currently being done and is it enough? And what more could be done? Which novel ideas and strategies could be employed? And for that first objective, I'm happy to share the first episode of a 3-part documentary series I directed on the project. The other 2 episodes are online on YouTube if you're curious. Guys, give some credits here. Puerto Williams is located in a buffer zone and the area of environmental transitions, which makes it a perfect place to study shorebirds that occupy a network of different habitats. The Shorebird Conservation Action Plan identifies 8 habitats, from inland meadows to wetlands to rocky shores to sandy beaches. And each of these habitats faces its own threats, which is why shorebird conservation can be extremely difficult. And although these threats have been ranked in order of threat from across the country, there was still little known about the variability of these threats at the regional level. So we surveyed 3 transects on the ferry, as well as 21 transects on the northern shore of Navarino Island, both the western and eastern sides of the Y905 highway, the southernmost highway in the world. And for each of those, we detected the presence or absence of the threat and the severity, which is the surface area percentage that is affected. So here's a map of the transects we surveyed on the boat, as well as some fun bird photos. And I'm happy to say that the reserve appeared pristine. We saw very few instances of some pollution. And on the island itself, we headed out on 2 drives, and again, we found a similarly undisturbed environment. There were 3 main threats in the reserve, the first of which is climate change, which is difficult to gauge in the present. So to understand its effect in the region, we can look at historical data. You can see this is average temperature change in the Cape Horn region, the blue line being that trend. And we see a slight increase, indicating it is getting warmer in the region. And we can also look at annual average precipitation. Again, we see a slight increase, meaning greater rainfall. And there was a recent study that showed that species richness is associated with increased precipitation, suggesting that climate change does in fact pose a threat to avian biodiversity in the region. The second main threat was pollution, primarily plastic, that littered the landscape, but also light and noise. And the third greatest threat was extensive livestock, mainly free-roaming cattle and horses that negatively impacted ecosystem vegetation and the soil. The other threats were also found on the island, albeit less intensity and less frequency, including stray dogs, energy consumption, urban development, off-road traffic, human disturbance, mining, and non-sustainable aquaculture. Happy to say the shorebirds were still thriving. And overall, we were able to get a better understanding of the location and distribution of the threats in the reserve. Interestingly, we found that the non-sustainable agriculture was more prevalent on the western side of the island, while the pollution dominated the eastern side of the landscape. And once we had the presence and absence for each one, we were able to identify the reach, severity, and irreversibility. Reach is the number of transects in which the proportion itself that the threats were affecting. The severity is that surface area, that percentage, and irreversibility is how difficult it is to remove the threat. For example, plastic pollution is easier to remedy than climate change itself. And once you have that reach and severity, you can get an overall magnitude that you can compare against irreversibility and get an overall degree of low, half, high, or very high for these threats. And as I said before, these threats were done for the entire country, with the top 3 being climate change, invasive species like the American mink, and agricultural crops. And using our data, we were able to create a similar table just for the region, identifying that climate change, extensive livestock, and then pollution were the main threats in the region. And this is very similar to the national strategy, except we see that greater threat from livestock and pollution as compared to invasive species. So what's next? What more could be done? According to the Shorebird Conservation Action Plan, the main strategic lines are to strengthen governance and mechanisms for conservation, empower and link the community and interest groups, promote research and monitoring, protect and manage sites, and encourage good practices in environmental impact assessment and productive activities. To gain firsthand insight into the issue, I conducted several interviews while I was there. I spoke with the researchers at the Cape Horn International Center and their collaborators. I talked to university students majoring in ecotourism and conservation, and a member of the Agricultural and Livestock Service. And based on my experiences and my time in Puerto Williams, I believe the 2 most important efforts are community engagement and long-term research and monitoring. Long-term research and monitoring is important to understand the shorebirds in the region, since much of what we know comes from North America. The MODIS Wildlife Tracking Program, an international research collaborative network that uses coordinated radio telemetry to track migratory birds, is a great start. And the southernmost station in the world is in Puerto Williams, which is a crucial spot along the flyway. The effort also faces what I would call the 13th threat: public apathy, a lack of interest, concern, and enthusiasm for conservation efforts in the community for shorebirds. And this is particularly important for long-term monitoring because you need a long line of young conservationists to fuel the program, especially after the program organizers retire. Thus, it's crucial to keep the community involved in what the Cape Horn International Center is doing and cultivate a conservation ethic among the people for themselves. And reaching out to youth and teaching them to use eBird and Merlin Bird ID to identify the birds around them is a wonderful place to begin. And finally, collaboration and communication is key. The Shorebird Conservation Action Plan requires extensive collaboration among governmental, academic, and community stakeholders, meaning that active and frequent communication is important and required and crosses language barriers. Since the shorebirds aren't spending all of their time in Chile, international collaboration becomes even more important. And being able to keep external threats out, like the salmon industry and the soon to be finished Pan American Road, is possible, but we need everyone to fight, including you. The voyage is not over. They run to the end of July, and they're actively seeking Darwin leaders. I encourage you to apply to travel somewhere new and amazing and change the world your way. I'll give you a second if you want to scan it. And I'm happy to answer questions later more about the program. It is fully funded. I'll give everyone a second. Okay. Happy to share this later too. And so my experiences at the Yale Myers Forest and Chile solidified my passions for ornithology, forestry, and conservation. And last February, I joined the Cometa Lab at the Yale School of the Environment and spent 8 weeks on Barro, Colorado Island in the heart of the Panama Canal. Through the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute, I measured predation pressure in recovering tropical rainforests using clay caterpillars. And I attended the Barro, Colorado Island Centennial Symposium. And I loved it. I loved, once again, being in the field, meeting pioneering researchers, and witnessing a trove of brimming biodiversity and natural wonder. But I still believe the great scientists keep public engagement at the forefront. So back on campus, as president of the College in Evolutionary Biology undergraduate group and co-president of the Student Birding Association, I lead workshops and field trips to foster a diverse community of students curious and passionate about the natural world. And I got another email in my inbox for something called the Young Climate Prize. And it was run by the World Around. The World Around is a nonprofit that seeks to bring the best architecture ideas to the public eye. And they have this program called the Young Climate Prize, which is a mentorship program to uplift and support young climate innovators and foster a generation that was born into the climate crisis and thus uniquely positioned to address it. And having learned my lesson from Darwin 200, I thought, what the heck, I'll apply. And at the time this came out, I was in Panama, and I remember Marcelina, my research peer, she agreed to help me film the video, and it was pouring rain the day we were filming, but she kept the camera steady, and I was like, we'll throw it in. And I was lucky enough to be part of the cohort this fall, and under the incredible leadership, mentorship of Ellie Stataki, who is the architecture editor at Wallpaper magazine, she helped me streamline all of my efforts into a single cohesive narrative that I've been trying to tell for the last 6 years. This is called Taking Flight. Are you a birder yet? One of Taking Flight's current initiatives is to raise awareness about window collisions and promote bird-friendly architecture. Almost 1 billion birds die every year in North America due to window strikes, and up to 60% are fatal. Since sophomore year, I've been working in the Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History's ornithology collections to prepare birds that have hit windows around campus. And through Taking Flight, I serve as the student leader for the Yale Bird Friendly Building Initiative. And I've been working to transform the project that's collecting data on window strikes around campus into a campus-wide volunteering task force. And this spring, we're collaborating with the Yale Visual Artists Collective to create a mural as an artistic way to retrofit existing glass facades around campus and reduce the number of window strikes. Unfortunately, in our society, the stereotype of a birder is an elderly, affluent, white, cisgender male that's obsessed with an esoteric, eccentric pastime. And it's not just ChatGPT. I asked my peers about it on campus, and when I asked them to imagine what a birder was to them, this is what they said. You get the idea. They agreed that birds are important to the environment, and they knew that birds were in decline worldwide. And they even said that they noticed the birds around them. But they didn't consider themselves birders. And I wondered why. Why aren't they birders? They said it was mainly because of education, access to outdoor spaces, and the cost of equipment. Taking Flight strives to radically transform the image of birding into one that is accessible, exciting, popular, and most importantly, a path to environmental action for all. And we are doing just that. In Ann Arbor, OSP has grown from 5 to 115 students. In New Haven, from 12 to 110. And we have taught birding to 70 middle schoolers in New Haven. And the podcast now has almost 800 plays across 27 states, 23 countries, and 6 continents. And new birders report that becoming a birder has led them to develop a responsibility for environmental conservation, participate in actions to help the environment, and feel more connected with global environmental challenges. This spring, in collaboration with the Yale Center for Engineering, Innovation, and Design, we are running a Build Your Own Bird Feeder workshop. And through carpentry, we are reaching a new group of students and motivating them to observe the birds around them. We also plan to launch Cranes of Yale in a collaboration with the Japanese American Students Union that will be a month-long program featuring a series of workshops on the cultural significance of the crane, origami, and global crane conservation efforts. We are not alone in seeking to bridge diverse ornithological perspectives to reach more people for birding. I had the pleasure of talking with decathlete Leanna Carrier and explorer Dr. Tim Duber in the fall about their awesome initiative, Wings of Survival. They are setting out on a 30,000 kilometer biking expedition to bike America's flyways. They will emulate the epic journeys of migratory birds, the world's greatest athletes. And so from scientists to architects to artists to athletes themselves, we seek to engage more people in birding, such that anyone and everyone can be a birder, and that every birder is an environmental activist. But if you're still thinking to yourself, that's not me, I can't really do something like this, let me try a different way. Anyone can do science. Science is making observations, asking questions, and seeking the answers. And because anyone can do that, anyone can be a scientist, and anyone can change the world. Know that people are more likely to trust science they understand. Thus, you need to bring it to them. So yes, take genetics and phylogenetic biology and comparative biology, but also take poetry, creative writing, and filmmaking. You're going to be better able to reach your audience if you have a diverse portfolio in your hand. And you can't just be a scientist, you have to be a storyteller. I started this talk with this photo of a yellow-throated toucan. And as I said, while they're mainly frugivorous, eating fruit, they'll occasionally catch lizards, large insects, and the eggs and young of other birds. It's not about finding the perfect fruit. It's about practicality. That's why I believe in being transparent about my experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly. First, failure is universal. The feeling that you don't belong, that you aren't good enough, and that you somehow fooled the world in getting here never goes away. Everyone is winging it. Some, just like Darwin, do it more confidently. The professionals know they're winging it. The amateurs pretend they aren't. Kindness is powerful. Never forget how influential you can be in the lives of others. For every person that you look up to, there is someone looking up to you. Be kind to them and be kind to yourself. Third, relationships are fundamental. Along the way, you are hopefully going to find unrelenting, unconditional support from those around you. These people matter, and the way that you treat them matters. So send an email to your middle school teacher and tell them how you appreciate them. Or tell your professor that their class changed your life. Never forget the people from your past, those who may or may not be here today when you take on tomorrow. Fourth, diversity is key. I believe inspiration and mutual tolerance stem from exposure to and integration of various perspectives. So surround yourself with people who think differently, who live differently. Learn from them, listen to them, and then craft your own worldview. Build inclusive communities where everyone feels welcomed, supported, and valued, ones that you are proud to be a part of. And last, inspiration drives collaboration. It is not enough for you to care. There is only so much you can do alone. Others need to care too. You must inspire them by wielding scientific communication and empowering them to be self-assured in being a scientist, and exploring the unknown, and taking adversity in stride, and treasuring the natural world around them. And so, because your most memorable adventures are going to come from unexpected moments, it is imperative that you try and fail, and be willing to try again and fail again. Exploration is an uncomfortable endeavor, and you might stall before you soar. But if you try, you'll find how far you can truly travel when you finally choose to fly. Thank you so much, and I'd be happy to take any questions you may have.